What was your is this beach serious moment? I used to work at the register of my college campus store. People mostly came in to buy energy drinks / gum or whatever, but you could also buy like sweatshirts and even computers. But given most people only bought like one small thing, we didn't have carts or baskets anywhere for shoppers anyway. One day a woman comes in, a student's mom I'm guessing, and asks me for help to reach a sweater on the top shelf. I grab it for her and go to hand it to her, but she motions at me to hold on for it. She proceeded to walk around the store grabbing several items and then giving them to me to hold. She literally shopped for like 10 minutes using me as her personal shopping cart. Luckily I had a coworker in the store on the same shift, so he was able to handle the register at the end of this whole ridiculous segment. She got a message on her phone, read it and said, "Oh, you know what, I actually have to go meet my son. I'll come back later to get the things I need." And then she left, and I was left standing there with an armful of random shit that I then needed to go put back one by one. Like mon woman point edit. To those calling me a beach or saying they would never do that, I applaud your bravery. I was an 18-year-old kid who was pretty excited to have a job to begin with and was scared of losing it from being rude to a customer. I definitely spent some solid time in the shower thinking of how I would have handled it differently. I have worked at Spirit Halloween every season for the past 5 years. I would highly recommend if you're trying to make some spare cash. Anyway, super shady things happen at Spirit Halloween all the time, so I have endless stories to tell. For this story, I was working the dressing room. Basically just regulating who goes in and taking costumes out of the bags to withhold accessories to prevent theft, etc. Point this was my first year working there, so I was about 20. Just a couple days before Halloween, a girl around my age came to the dressing room with a typical college girl costume, that's all I'll say. She says something like, "Oh good, we are about the same size." I'm in a rush, so I wouldn't have time to find an associate to help me. I just kinda smiled and took the bag from her, like what the hell does that even mean? I unpack the costume, leave the accessories, and put it in a basket to carry to the dressing room. She looked really confused, so I just asked her to follow me and I'd get her a dressing room. I wish I was making this shit up, but this girl says to me, "Why would I go back there for you to change?" I can't even remember exactly how I responded because I was so confused, but it was something along the lines of, "You try on the costume yourself so you know how it fits you. An associate doesn't do it for you." And this girl had the audacity to be mad at me for saying that. Her response was basically, "Well, I don't want to have to get out of my clothes and change into the costume, so it isn't worth my time." That's so unsanitary to have a bunch of people trying the costume on instead of you just doing it, so I don't even want it anymore. Followed by her storming out. Pointy removed my comments about pay because for some reason people are getting defensive about my belief that the wage is acceptable for the amount of effort put in. Yesterday I read a comment section on one of those Bill Gates wants to implant everyone with microchips via vaccines articles. Some reasonable person commented that you could reject all medication that way if you are so paranoid, thinking people would get the absurdity of it. Point. But the responses were in the fashion of reject all vaccination. Don't trust the government to have your best interests in mind. They want to break up your family, to make you into a controllable unit, and destroy your children's health. It's clear that this is what the ultra-liberal Darwinists want. They are planning a demise of humanity. Another one was, "That's right. People are not healing people and health does not come from doctors. It comes from God and the Holy Spirit. Do not believe Western technocratic scientific medicine. It's a form of biological warfare against the Slavic nation." And a few go ask Bill Gates for a priority dose of the injection. You complete moron. Sigh. This is Russia, by the way. Edit. Another frequent one was an appeal to historical empires. The Americans and the Brits have been poisoning people all the time, like smallpox to Native Americans and Agent Orange the Vietnamese. Do we suddenly believe they have good intentions with us? So naive. Clearly a globalist like Bill Gates is just waging biological warfare on behalf of the Anglo-Saxon elites. Mine was when we went out drinking with 4 of my friends from college and played Never Have I Ever at a bar. A friend of mine Let's call her B4Beach, knew something about me that I was very embarrassed about, and it made me anxious even thinking about it. B knew these two, so naturally she brings up this very specific thing in the game, then looks at me directly, making it obvious for everyone at the table that I've in fact done this thing. This hurt me, but was not actually my "is this beach serious" moment. It came afterwards, when another friend realized how uncomfortable I was, so to keep the game going and move on from me, she did the same thing with B, telling the table something that B has done. Long story short, B flipped out in the middle of the bar, started yelling at my friend for being rude, and exposing her to all of us, humiliating her etc. Point: this might not sound that irrational from her side, but the catch is that we all knew about B's thing, because she already told us and other classmates about it numerous times, whereas with mine she was the only person who knew. Point: needless to say, we are no longer friends with B after that night. This only happened a few days ago. I got called into the manager's office and got offered the temporary clothing manager position. I didn't necessarily want a manager's position, but I had basically been doing the job for months without the benefits, so I accepted it. Went onto the shop floor and was immediately greeted with congrats from colleagues. A girl I work with that had recently become a duty manager. How she became a manager is beyond me. Went and told my business to everyone, including the fact that she had been offered the job first and turned it down, so that's why it was handed to me. Everyone knew I was being offered the position before I did. 15 minutes later I'm approached by a different manager saying there's an issue with putting me on the system, but they are trying to rectify it. For the next 2 hours I listened to the girl telling everyone and anyone how hard she is going to have it, that she will now have to cover the clothing department as well as her own department. She told colleagues, friends, and even customers who didn't even ask. She made my business known to everyone. Eventually I was brought into the office and officially told that I wouldn't be the clothing manager. Boss missed a deadline to put me on the system. The manager apologized profusely, and I went back out on the floor to hear the new DM telling my story yet again. Longest shift ever. I worked for a grocery store. Big chain one, probably the first one that comes to mind. I was bagger/cart wrangler. There was this one overweight blonde woman, see Karen, who would come in all time and cause no end of chaos. Examples of her fuckery include buying a 15-pound turkey. She came in complaining it tasted bad and wanted to return it. She presented a platter with an empty carcass, save for one piece of meat on one bone. She bought like a $37 plant, did not water it, showed up with it 1 year and 6 months later, dead as a doornail, demanding a refund. She bought a grill, used 10 gallons of gasoline as fuel, caused an understandable fire/explosion, came back with receipt and charred grill, demanding a refund. I could go on. Point: this would be a weekly, if not bi-weekly happening. It got to the point where many cashiers would see her enter the store, turn off their light, and leave. Now when I say she made a fuss, I'm not talking your normal "I want to speak to your manager" type deal. Oh no, she would rant and rave, throw herself on the floor, roll around, throw things, call the police. 87 times that I witnessed. I kept count, and pull out her cell phone filming herself being victimized to report us to the media. She was eventually banned from the store. This took years. I heard stories that she began terrorizing our neighbor branch 7 blocks down the road. One time I ordered a chicken fried steak in a restaurant in which I was currently the only customer. It took an hour to get my food, and when I started eating I realized that I had gotten chicken fried chicken. I called the waitress over and explained to her that I had ordered chicken fried steak, which she confirmed was accurate, but had received chicken fried chicken. She stared blankly at me for about 10 seconds and said, "What, you don't like chicken?" I'm usually pretty quick on my feet with a witty comeback, but I was literally left speechless for a minute. I finally got the words out to explain to her why I wasn't happy with this mix-up, but ended up just leaving. Needless to say I have not been back. Edit 1. Restaurant in question was Pepper's in Hebronville, Texas. Edit 2. Another time I was in New Martinsville, West Virginia at a steakhouse, don't remember the name, and my waitress hadn't been back to refill our drinks. Looked around and saw she was getting finger-banged in the drink station by what I'm assuming was a busboy. I work in the oil field and have been to some interesting places in my life. Saw a 300-pound lady wearing booty shorts that said I heart dick beat the shit out of her 5-year-old wearing nothing but a diaper in the dining room of a Pizza Hut in Marietta, Ohio one time. Edit 3. Do people really not know what chicken fried steak is? It's cubed steak battered and fried served with white gravy. A staple of Southern comfort food. I used to be the community admin for an online game about a decade ago, and there was a guy who was permabanned who kept making new accounts to protest his ban on the official forums and get people to try and rally behind him to unban him or put malicious links to scam people. Our GM staff was largely outsourced, so I did most of the forum moderation on my own. He had obvious and telling posting habits and horrendous grammar, so it was usually easy to know if it was him, and a quick check of an IP address to verify, and the account was usually banned and posts deleted where appropriate. Well, this idiot one day, using a bunch of different accounts, I'm not even sure why. Banning was easy on my end, and he made like 20 messages supporting himself, all that logging in and out, made a long chain of posts trying to deliberately bribe me, out in the open, to unban his account. Not even a private message, just straight up in a new thread offering me cash to do. So point 41. I started the job as a player, recruited for my honesty and ethics as a whole in the community. It wasn't happening, and the cash was negligible in what I was being paid. Second, how dumb does one have to be to think someone would accept a deal like that with everyone watching? Or did he think I would be so stupid to fall for something like that in blackmail? By showing any sign of interest, I had the webmaster IP block him after that, since he was using a static IP, and left the thread open for posterity to prove the point. I visited my grandparents for the holidays in a northern part of the state. All of our family went together and stayed in their fairly large house for several days. The second day I was there, I tried to organize a family game for everyone to play, since nobody seemed to be doing much of anything. Nobody wanted to play any of the games I suggested, so my husband and I pulled out our Magic the Gathering cards we had brought and started to play together. My mom approached me in the middle of a game and said, "I can't believe you brought a game like that to a family gathering. You two have isolated yourself from everyone else by choosing to play your nerd game instead of mingle with family." Everyone else was just talking and watching TV, and we did end up getting my sister to join us for a game, so I don't know what her problem was. Later that same day I got really tired from running around in the woods with a couple of my family members and decided to take a nap on the couch downstairs. I was awoken by my mom, who looked concerned and asked me if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine, just tired, and she suddenly switched. "It's too bad you came all the way here not to spend any time with your family. We were putting together a game upstairs and everyone was asking where's Raven, but we couldn't find you, so." Basically she got mad at me for playing my own game with my husband when nobody was interested in hanging out with me, but later when I'm tired and trying to sleep everyone decides to play a game together, and I'm at fault for not wanting to spend time with family? I used to work for my roommate's mom and stepdad doing insulation work in crawl spaces and attics. My pay was set up, so I always got paid the same amount, no matter how many hours I worked, which was ridiculous, because I almost always worked at least 40 hours a week. Anyway, one day my boss collected the pay for a job early and told us we had to finish that day, which initially was fine. A 14-hour workday later I felt it was considerably less fine, but I did it and didn't voice a single complaint. The next day I called to tell them I was gonna wrap up early. I had reached a good stopping point, and it was only 2 hours early. She proceeds to tell me that she's going to dock my pay for the week if I leave before 4, and I calmly explained how I just worked 14 hours the previous day and I have a life and I need to have time to wash clothes, buy groceries, etc. She then says to me that I maybe should have got the job done quicker on the previous day if I knew I had things to take care of. It was at this point that I about lost it. Like, did you think I was just hanging out in this man's crawl space having the time of my life? Icing on the cake is I drove over to talk about it with them, and we agreed I should be paid hourly, and they proceeded to cut my hours to 25 to 30 for 3 weeks. I quit shortly thereafter. I was working in a clothing store in a beach town when a Karen walked in holding one of the store's bags. When I saw her dyed blonde hair I knew I was in for some crazy shit. So she walked up to the register and said she'd like to make a return and pulled out a bathing suit for a little boy. Before she even handed me the receipt I told her, "Ma'am, you can't return that." "What do you mean?" she said. "You can't return a boy's bathing suit. It's on the receipt." Which it was even circled. We always told customers this when they bought bathing suits. You telling me that I can't return my son's bathing suit that he only wore once and that doesn't fit him? No, ma'am. I'm sorry. Why is that? Now, for those few people who are a little confused why Karen couldn't return the bathing suit, a lot of male bathing suits have netting in them. This netting comes into contact with your dick and your ass. In other words, Karen was basically trying to return used underwear. I tried explaining it to her using euphemisms because I wasn't prepared to talk about her son's dick and his sweat and other bodily fluids at 8 o'clock in the morning. Then she screamed at me for 10 minutes like I was a war criminal until my manager had to get involved. In conclusion, I've worked many retail jobs and have adopted the dictum, "The customer is usually wrong." Funny story. I worked in a bookstore where a local sci-fi author was selling his self-published series. He was a sweet guy and really interesting until he said, "You gotta watch Ancient Aliens." When I rewatched Close Encounters of the Third Kind I realized it was a documentary. I nodded and walked away. Later before he left he stopped me and said, "Remember, it's a documentary." I used to manage a storage facility for about 3 years. Chillest job I ever had, except once a month, when we had to start doing auction proceedings on units behind 3 months. I'd have a list of people to call 2 weeks before to let them know, then 1 week, then 3 days, then 1 day. We had our share of regulars who would pay the minimum amount a few days before they were set to sell, some who just simply couldn't afford it, even with knocking off additional fees. Those were always the hardest, and those who didn't care, because it was all trash anyway. So I'm making my calls and I get this guy who had one of our 20-foot x 30 units. This unit was packed with stuff. Tools, furniture, paintings, toys, electronics, you name it, he had it. Normally when I'm making my calls I never expect an answer on the other line, and usually leave a voicemail. This guy picked up on my first call. I'll let him know that he has 2 weeks to pay off the minimum balance, otherwise his unit will be auctioned off. He's very polite, says he understands, thanks me and assures me he will come in with the minimum payment. Another week goes by, I call again, same thing. This happens until the day before. He has been pleasant and kind whenever I call him, so I really hammer at the point that, unless he makes the minimum payment before we close, his unit will be sold off and there won't be anything I can do about it. He says he has the money, but can't get down there until 8. We close at 6. I tell him that I would be willing to stay till 8, but after that my hands were tied. He promises to be there, so I hang up and let my district manager know what's going on. The DM gives me permission to stay open, so I set about getting some extra cleaning done. 8 comes and goes and finally at 8:30 I call him one last time. No answer. I leave him a voicemail saying he has 15 minutes before I'm gone. Never shows up. The next morning his unit goes to sale and is cleared out within 3 hours. I shrug it off and set to work with all the paperwork. At 5 PM the guy shows up. Hey, I know I'm late, but I have the money. Me, I'm so sorry, late man, but your unit was sold this morning and is already emptied. I waited until 8:45 last night and you didn't show, and I didn't hear from you. Your property is legally someone else's now. I can see the anger and confuses building up in his face before he loses his mind. Him. Are you faking kidding me? Tirade of insults and babbling. I thought you guys were bluffing. Who the fuck sells off other people's stuff like that? You only called me a day before it was set to sell. Me, sir. That's not true. I called you many times. We had multiple conversations about what was due and when. I told you each time I talked to you that your property would be legally auctioned off. You told me you would be in yesterday at 8 and failed to show. There was literally nothing else I could have done. Who bought it? Me. Sir, I can't tell him. You faking better, or I'll have your job. Me. Here's the number to our district manager. He'll be happy to answer any more questions you have. But I assure you, there is nothing more we can do for you now. The dude storms off and peels out of my driveway while giving me the bird the entire time. Some people I felt really bad for having to sell their stuff. That guy? Not so much. Warning, typed fast. When I was a child arguing with my parents, while distraught and crying, I tried expressing my feelings of hopelessness, insecurities, and pure lack of will to want to be anywhere. That as a kid was the only way I knew how to express the feelings of not wanting to be alive. Due to a birth injury preventing me from living out my dreams of being a star athlete, my parents admitted to being the ones who kept me from tryouts year after year. They would always tell me I needed doctor's permission, then they would tell me we would let you. But the doctor said no. I yelled, no, you don't know what it's like to be forced to be different. To be told you'll never be able to do the one thing you've wanted forever. My mother's response, but you don't know what it's like to be a parent and watch your child be different than the other kids. I could only think, wow, you've lied to me my whole life to my face. Crushed my dreams year after year. Slept soundly, and all you can say to me, while I'm pouring out my deepest sadness, is, but what about how I feel? She followed that by telling me, you're my child and I decide what's best for you. When you turn 18, if you want to go out there and get yourself hurt forever, then that's your choice. Until then, pick a new dream. I was never the same after that moment. It still hurts to think about the what ifs wrapped around everything leading up to that evening point. TLDR, my mom told me to pick new dreams because she is the parent. TLDR, girl somehow got into a prestigious college and couldn't even add. Still doesn't have to pay for college. Point, there's a girl at my college studying criminal justice. She was about to fail the lowest level of math the school offered for a second time, and a friend of hers asked me to tutor her for the final. I'm in Calc 2 at the time. I was going over PEMDAS, and she asks why she even needs to know math. I was explaining that if she was an attorney, she'll need to be able to figure out what to charge clients, or if she's a cop, she'll need to calculate speeds and ticket prices. She asks what I mean, so I explained. If you and another car are driving toward each other, and when you pass, your radar says they were going 80 miles per hour and your speedometer says you're going 40 miles per hour, you'll have to subtract your speed to get this. So that's 80 to 40. Now, it was at this point I realized her eyes have glazed over, and she wasn't listening. So after waiting for an answer for 10 seconds, I look at her and say, can you add? To which she replies, yeah, I see, can do that. I respond, okay, let's just move on then, I suppose. Can you multiply? And she says, no, not at all. The best part? Her college is free and paid for, so she can get the degree and sit on her rear end while I but my butt to stay above a 3.5 and still wind up paying thousands a semester. Had a friend who was a complete asshole driver. He thought it was funny to tailgate, not move at green lights, until it turned yellow, and then gun it so everyone behind him missed the light. He would never let people merge, etc. I truly hated ever being in a car with him. He also thought of himself as a real badass. He had full sleeve tattoos, shaved head, he wore combat boots, tried to give off this I'm a tough guy vibe. I'm not friends with him anymore. He was just too much to take. So one day, he tailgated and blares his horn at a guy driving in front of us. I assume for driving too slowly, or some other perceived slight. What happened next was glorious. The guy slammed on his brakes, gets out of his car, walks over to the driver's side window of my friend's truck. The window was down, because it was a hot summer day, and says, did you just beep at me? So my friend in his best tough guy voice says, yeah, what the fuck are you gonna do at? My friend never finished the sentence because the dude threw a goddamned haymaker right into his face, knocking him completely out. I reached over, grabbed the e-brake, so we didn't keep rolling. The guy just says, don't be a faking asshole, gets back in his car, drives away. My buddy woke up a minute or so later, completely confused and on the verge of tears. He couldn't believe his action actually had consequences. Anyway, he pretty much dropped the tough guy act after that and stopped driving like an asshole. So thank you, random, angry, one punch man. One day at my old restaurant job, I had a big group in my section. I check on them once they've had a couple bites, and one guy says his burger is undercooked. Obligatory apology. Then I take his plate and tell him I'll have the kitchen cook it more. It's an open kitchen, so he sees me telling the cooks the situation. I went to the back to drop off some dishes, and when I came back out, no more than a minute later, that same guy's in my face. Livid. He starts screaming about how the cook put the burger back on the grill. I'm like, how else is he supposed to cook it more? He keeps saying he's a chef, so he knows what he's talking about. He demanded to see a manager. I tell my manager the situation, and I point to the guy who has now gone to the front of the restaurant and is beckoning my manager over. My manager basically says fuck that guy and instead walks over to the table to talk with the rest of the family. They all loved their food and agreed that the one guy was way out of line. He never even came back in to finish the meal with his family. Edit. I 100% understand that a new burger should have been cooked, but I was a waiter and in no way in control. I walked away before I had seen anything. Dude was still in his hole though. Guess I also forgot to mention that the burgers came pre-cut, and so dude was rating the meat temp. He never even ate. There was this girl I'd had a class with before, and while I tried to be polite she was just kind of disrespectful. Instead of doing her work she would go on Instagram and etc. even though the teacher told her not to. One time she was on Instagram again and scrolling and taking selfies and etc. after the teacher told her not to, and she didn't give a damn because she was at a table where she was the table closest to the teacher and directly in the teacher's line of sight. Then the teacher called her vain and something else. I think he said disrespectful or something along those lines, and took her phone away. Then she said please I'll be good in an attempt to get her phone back. She got it back at the end of class I think. Then later in the year there was an application if you wanted to go up into the advanced class next year. Her best friend got in and she didn't. I don't think she even applied, but I saw her begging the teacher to be in that class. The teacher said something about her behavior and her application, and then she said how her friend was her best friend and that she'll be good. The teacher was like no, and you and your friend can stay apart for an hour. I worked at a movie theater for a couple years. We had a few coin-operated arcade games. If people wanted to break larger bills into coins so that they could play the games, we would happily do that for them. We were not, however, able to do cash-back transactions where someone would pay with a credit card and would be given back cash. There was an ATM available inside the building. One day this woman came in with her daughter, probably around 4 or 5 years old. They were having some fun with the games. Then they came up to my register. The mom asked me if she could pay $5 with her card so that I could give her $5 in change. I told her that unfortunately I was unable to do that, and I pointed out the ATM behind her. This woman flips out on me. Really? You're going to tell my daughter that she can't play those games? Mind you, even if I wanted to give her cash back, it wasn't even an option on my register. It would have looked like I stole money out of my till. The thing that really pissed me off though was when the daughter said to her mom, "Mommy, can I play now?" The woman turned to her and said, "No sweetie, this woman, me, isn't gonna let you play the games. Honestly, fuck off. Seriously, what are you teaching your daughter?" I work as a creative for a food company. My role doesn't usually involve creating output for specific customers to use, more for our own advertising, brochures etc. But sometimes for large customers we make exceptions. A small business owner asks my colleague in sales if we could make him some posters. He was a new customer and my colleague said yes to get him on board. Not ideal. He doesn't send me the request till a day before my annual leave. I come back 2 weeks later, call the customer and we agree he'll send me some details and I'll get something to him over the next few days. His list arrives and he has very specific items like chili burger, special burger etc. I was expecting generic images of takeaway food, so I ask him for images. He doesn't have any. I politely explain that without actually building the burger specifically as he would make them, the images won't match, so there's not much point. He goes off on one. accuses me of wasting his time, says I should build them at our expense, then complains to my colleague and then my director about the service. I find out days later he spent a grand total of £200 with us last year. Didn't spend a single second more dealing with him. Bye bye. I had a friend a while ago that I was getting fed up over with her childish attitude, which she would say it's because of her ADHD, and after trying to gradually break it off for a month, I finally called her out on her BS and attitude, explaining that I could literally only deal with her when she was on her ADHD meds, which she refused to take because of headaches, which I understood. It was that she refused to look for a better means and used her ADHD as an excuse for her beachy behavior. I tried to be polite, but this chick didn't like being called out and laid this line on me, saying you can't hang out or handle me without my meds is like me not wanting to be friends with you because you had cancer. It hadn't even been a year since my last chemo treatment. I was glad to be rid of her that day. What sucked more was a mutual friend called me a liar and threatened me for hurting her, followed by someone I didn't know would send me texts from unknown numbers and threaten and harass me for about a month. Nothing came from it, so it's not my problem anymore. Update. This same friend just reconnected with me today, 2 days after I remembered this story and posted it, apologizing, genuinely, for everything. They don't have Reddit, to my knowledge, so I found it surprising that after nearly a decade she popped into my messenger. 9 years can change people, for sure. Cheers, everyone. Went to an opera last year where a whole family with 2 little girls sat in the row in front of me. The girls kept whispering, no big deal. They were like 5 years old, and they were excited. They were easily the best behaved out of the entire group. The adults in the family kept talking, pulling out their phones to check Twitter, which is distracting to most people, but I have some really bad issues with lights in dim settings, and all I could see were bluish white circles covering my vision. After the intermission they're not there and I'm relieved, until they all file in 5 minutes after the start of the second act with snacks. Intermission is literally for using the bathroom and getting concessions and all that, so that you don't interrupt the opera. One of the women loudly crunches peanut M&Ms with her mouth open every so often, with just long enough of a break in between each one that you finally start to relax before your teeth get set on edge again. Then they get up and shuffle around, with the grandma moving up a row to sit with the little girls. More talking, eating, phone browsing. Then about 20 minutes in, they start loudly fretting that the girls are up past their bedtime. They shuffle themselves around a bit more, then grandma takes the girls and slowly leads them out. Some more phones, M&Ms, then at last the rest of them all get up at once and file out, still very much in the middle of the production. The only comfort in all this was knowing that an usher was right behind me and saw all of it, and after the show all of us in that spot were just beaching to each other and laughing at how awful it was. The very next day the Metropolitan Opera House was streaming another opera to a local movie theater and I went to see that too. Even in a movie theater, where you could bring in food, leave whenever you wanted without too much judgment, whisper to each other, whatever, that crowd was so much better behaved than the one that paid like 8 times the price to be in a fancy opera house.